Hello and welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Stephen Ryan.
And I'm Matthew Lucas, and we post every Friday. So if you want to follow our continuing horticultural adventures, do press subscribe and the alert button and you will know what we're doing every day.
And don't forget, if you've got a horticultural question that you think I might be able to answer, we do that on a Monday in our shorts. So I have to answer your question in 60 seconds or less. Do post where you come from because it gives me context, and I'm very happy to try and answer your specific questions.
So put those comments below and Stephen will try and answer it. And bit of housekeeping, every plant that we mentioned in today's video is in the copy below. If you can't see it, just press read more and bing, there they will all be.
And don't forget, if you've become a really enthusiastic horticulturalist because of us or
Yes.
for any other reason, if you're in Australia, you might consider joining the Royal Horticultural Society of Victoria. They have a really good quarterly journal that goes out, and they have all sorts of interesting events and functions on throughout the year. And it's a good way to meet like-minded horticulturalists.
I have heard, though, there is a very self-indulgent, very difficult patron.
Yeah, me.
Anyway, Stephen, I am loving the cornice behind us, but surely we have already made a cornice epic.
Yeah, well, we have made a cornice epic, and this isn't one of them.
What is this then?
You're looking at a viburnum.
Oh.
It's Viburnum plicatum, one of the lovely tabulated viburnums.
Goodness
and
me.
it's looking stunning at the moment.
It is.
I love plants that have that sort of horizontal layered effect. I think there's something really classy about them. So,
Is that what we're talking about?
no.
Oh.
We're
What are we here for? Where are we? Tell me everything.
All right, now we need to go in to do all the housekeeping. We're actually back at Gentiana Nursery in the Dandenongs,
Yes.
the domain of Craig Wilson, who is a great plantsman. And
You might remember our epic
Oh, yes.
bonsai and our epic look at New Zealand foliage plants, all of which we'll link below, which we filmed here previously.
Yes, exactly. And today we're going to have a look at Craig's wonderful collection of hostas.
Well, when we were here a few weeks ago, well, actually months ago now, filming, Craig was separating all his hostas, which weren't quite up yet, and we were inspired.
We were indeed. And he seems to have probably as good a collection as you'll see anywhere, so it seemed logical to come back and have a look at them now that they're up and in leaf.
Well, without further ado, Stephen, let us dive into the hosta patch.
Let's do just that.
Stephen, oh my goodness, look at Craig's shade house.
Yes.
I could weep with excitement. I've never seen so many hostas in one spot.
It is a pretty impressive collection.
Yeah.
And it really is an interesting group considering how few there are.
Yeah. So firstly, I guess, tell us where are hostas from? What's the story with them as a genus?
All right, well, they're all from Japan, China area, so
Yep.
all Asian. There's only 22 recognised species at this stage.
Really?
So
That
it
doesn't seem like many.
it isn't really when you consider some of the other groups of plants that we use as garden plants.
Yeah.
It's quite a small genus.
Yeah.
But it has thrown all sorts of interesting variation from seed. There's been variegation forms that have come up spontaneously. So there's lots and lots of interesting and different things that hostas have managed to do, as you can see. And I have to say, the variegated hostas, and you're going to agree with this, I know you are one of the few things in the variegated plant world. The only other thing I can think of is some of the ornamental variegated grasses. That the snobs out there who look down their nose at variegates will actually...
Looking at me.
Yes, yeah. Well, even you will make an exception, will you not, for
I
hostas?
do. You're right. I don't know what it is, but I think the colour combinations are just a bit softer.
Yeah.
Softer on a hosta.
They generally grow in forest-type conditions, so they'll grow as an understory in mixed and deciduous forests. They go dormant in the winter, so they're going to disappear in the winter.
Yep.
They like a spot that's moistish. Now, some hostas will cope with a little bit of drought, but they do need to be in the shade, and they do better if, in fact, they've got adequate moisture through the growing season.
Yeah. Now, where does the name come from? Hosta.
Well, I have to say, once upon a time, I can remember as a young horticulturalist, their name had not long changed, I think, but they used to be known as funkias.
Funkier.
Yeah, funkier. They're now Hosta, and it's named after Nicolaus Thomas Host. And he was a physician and botanist.
Yep.
He wrote a highly interesting work on the grasses of Austria that I'm sure everybody's going to...
me back.
Yeah,
Amazon, here I
yeah,
come. I want every copy.
Yes, and he was also the personal physician for the Holy Roman Emperor Francis II. So he was obviously thought of as something of a decent sort of physician as well as an amazing botanist. So
Yes.
he's had a group of plants named after him, and I'm quite jealous.
Right. Now, okay, so we've done the basics, where they're
Yes.
from, it's a smallish genus, ideal conditions. There are many, many things for us to go through with hostas, but I think maybe the first thing we should do is maybe look at where Craig has got them in the garden as
Yeah.
a starting point. Then we can look at how you can grow them in pots,
Yeah.
how you divide them, propagate them. Any other things?
Yes, what a good idea, because there are lots of different aspects of this comparatively small genus.
All right, well, let's go into the garden and see what he's got going on.
Good.
So, Stephen, here we are in what could be described as the archetypal woodland garden.
Exactly. Large deciduous trees above us, so they let the winter light in for the early bulbs.
Yep.
And the garden is full of all sorts of proper woodland plants.
Yes. Okay, so let's then just describe the ideal garden conditions for a hosta. So we've alluded to deciduous trees.
Yes.
But now this is a herbaceous perennial. So the whole winter light thing doesn't affect these plants.
No, not particularly. But the canopy of deciduous trees tends to let a little bit more filtered light through than that of evergreen trees does.
Right.
So that they'll get better light in the summer months
Yeah.
without getting the direct sunlight on them.
Okay, and obviously the leaf litter will...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the other thing with deciduous trees. People forget that deciduous trees generally have a soft leaf,
Yeah.
and so it becomes leaf mold that rots down into humus quite quickly, whereas evergreen plants tend to drop their foliage and it sits there as dry stuff that just doesn't break down in any sort of hurry.
Now, I know this because I'm the victim of some evergreen Magnolia grandifloras.
Oh,
Those
goodness.
leaves are, firstly, they protect the soil from water, which is
Yeah.
not a great thing, and they just never break down.
Yeah, no, they take forever. If you don't put
Yeah.
them through a shredder or something, they sit there for yonks. So deciduous trees are the ideal thing for any of these woodland plants.
Which then, I guess, takes us to the soil type. So
Yeah.
what's the ideal soil for hostas?
Well, hostas aren't particularly aligned towards an alkaline or acidic soil.
Yeah.
They seem to be able to grow in a modicum of alkaline soils, and they'll grow right through to quite heavily acid soils.
Yeah.
But the big thing about them is to have a nice humus-rich, well-drained, but moisture-retentive soil in which to grow them. And that, of course, works for the vast majority of woodland plants anyway.
Exactly.
So if you've got it right for your hostas, you'll probably have it right for practically all the others.
Now, alluding to all the others, what are the neighbours? So there's epimediums here.
Epimediums. Now that's another group of plants that we will be engaging with shortly. So we'll have a
Watch this
video.
space.
Yeah, we'll have a video on epimediums at some point.
What's next to you there?
We've got one of the woodland geraniums, Geranium macrorhizum. We've got a potophyllum that I'm just being very friendly with just down here, so a Chinese mayapple. And across further, we've got the beautiful gold-leafed hydrangea, Little Honey.
And the flower just to your...
Oh, and there's some comfrey there as well, so symphytum. So
Yes.
there's quite a mixture of things. We've got some lovely herbaceous ferns behind us.
Daphne.
There's a Daphne there, which is moderately woodland.
And a Cuba.
Oh, yes, and there's some lovely acubas behind us. So
Which
we've
have-
got some really good specimens of those.
Many of which have featured in our videos before.
Yeah.
Now, so talk to me about the perennial. So this is a perennial woodland border.
Yeah.
What role does the hosta play in the cycle of that
All
bed?
right. Well, I think the big thing about hostas is the big thing about hostas. They're big leaves.
What's the big thing about hostas, Stephen?
It's their bold and interesting foliage that sort of holds them up. I mean, they do flower and they get quite attractive flowers, but it is about foliage. Some of them have got quite a good perfume.
Yeah, mine
So,
does.
yeah, so the scented ones like grandiflora are really lovely, and so the flowers come out sort of in midsummer to late-ish summer, so they become a component of what it's all about. But really, hostas are all about their foliage, and the variegated ones I think are particularly useful because in fact they bring a bit of light and colour into a shadier border.
Now, these are beech trees above us.
Yeah.
And so that's going to create quite dense shade as
Oh, yes.
these leaves mature. We're in sort of mid-spring at the moment. So I guess something like this with these amazing gold leaves is
Yeah.
going to look really bright and beautiful in what will be quite a shady spot.
Oh yes, yes. Gold and silver variegated forms in the shade are really useful plants. This one is called So Sweet. And there've been so many hybrids of hostas produced over the years. I think they're starting to run out of names in some cases.
But it also means there is a hosta for everyone, Steve.
Oh yes.
And
yes.
a hosta for every spot.
Well, every shady spot.
True, every shady spot. Okay.
Yeah. So now we probably should allude also to hostas requirements re pests and things.
Yes,
whilst we're in the woodland.
But hang on, before we get to that though, let's just finish with the whole soil and herbation stuff. So how would you, I mean, would you mulch them? Would you fertilize them? What would be the care? Once they've died down, what would you do? Would you cover them?
I probably wouldn't go out of my way to cover them, but the trees above are going to do that anyway.
Yep.
So the foliage will fall down out of the beech trees or whatever you're growing them under, and it will make a nice insulating layer of mulch over the surface. So as time goes on, they become more and more self-sufficient if the conditions are right, because they're doing exactly what happens in the wild. You've got foliage dropping amongst them, rotting down.
Feeding them.
And feeding them. Hopefully you've got some birds flying over, dropping some guano, you know, so there's things going on that would naturally keep them ticking over. So apart from perhaps when they become exceedingly large and perhaps slightly congested clumps, you could leave many of the hostas in the ground for donkey's years before you actually do anything to them.
So no particular fertilizing, no particular care. Okay.
No, they don't require strong feeding. In pots, you'd want to feed them when you pot them up. So I would use a slow release fertilizer when I pot them up in the late winter, and that should keep them going right through the season.
We'll get to potted hostas in a minute.
But in the ground, I mean, you might like to put a little bit of fertilizer around them once they're settled in for the first year. But once they really get going, unless they become really congested, they're going to look after themselves.
Brilliant. All right, so let's get now back to the pests. The big thing then is their leaves and how juicy they are.
Yes, they are. They're very succulent and they are greatly loved by slugs and snails.
So what do you do, Stephen? What do you do?
Well, it depends on where you are and to how bad an issue it is, but you've got to remember that once hostas send up their leaves for the year, those leaves tend to stay there for the whole season. So if you haven't protected them from slugs and snails early in the season, you end up with something that looks like ripped paper doilies instead of nice big clean leaves. Certainly, in my climate, I would probably put a little bit of snail bait of some form around them. I don't like using too much in the way of chemicals, but I would probably use a little bit of snail bait around my hostas.
And is it copper or iron-based one, which is not toxic to other animals?
Yeah, the iron-based one is supposed to be non-toxic to pets and what have you, so that would probably be the best solution, but they're also much more slow acting.
You have mentioned this to me.
Yeah.
So just for context, this is the slug and snail bait that if a bird or a rodent or a mammal, whatever, would eat the dead snail, it's not going to be poisoned by ingesting the dead snail.
No, it shouldn't be. But the problem with some of these iron-based ones...
They don't work.
Well, no, they work, but the slug and snail lives long enough to cause a lot of damage before it dies. And so unless you can get on top of the cycle and keep them at bay as much as possible, the more toxic snail baits, of course, knock them out really quick smart, but then you've got the added flow-on effect of damaging other creatures.
Is there a natural balance that can occur with the right amount of slugs and snails? Because all of us, well, hopefully all of us, are very focused on the need not to use chemicals and to allow insects and animals to roam free and do their thing to a degree.
Yeah, to a degree, yes.
Would you just, if you've got sort of a natural balance of slugs and snails, which you will have in your garden, just leave it at that?
Well, I think, you know, in most people's cases you have to, but the issue you've got, particularly in suburban gardens, is no matter how much you're letting nature take its course, your neighbours probably aren't. And they will be inclined to either nuke everything with something disgusting and therefore disbalance the whole ecology in the neighbourhood, not just in your garden. And so things then get out of balance and then it's really hard to get them back again.
You become a haven for slugs and snails.
Yeah, that's right. They all move into your place.
Toxic chemicals.
Yeah, so...
There's no easy answer then, really.
In the garden, perhaps not. But of course, the other thing we will be discussing is growing hostas in pots, and therein is one of the saving graces.
Not a nibble in sight because all of Craig's are elevated and every leaf is perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And it is the best way to see a hosta with perfect leaves.
All right. Well, that then I think leads us naturally to go and have a look at more of Craig's specimens.
The whole collection.
Yes, because the leaf variety is amazing.
All right, let's go and do that.
Okay. All right, Stephen, let's talk size.
Yes. It matters. Hostas have been bred for, since the turn of the last century, really. And in the wild, there are some quite small growing wild species. And of course, then there's the big ones like grandiflora, et cetera, et cetera. So they've been breeding in different directions. And we've got a little bit of selection of them just here to give you a sense of just how much breeding has created both smaller and larger types.
Which end of the spectrum should we start?
Let's start with the little tiny wee ones. We've got Chartreuse Wiggles.
Chartreuse Wiggles.
So it's yellowy green and it's got wiggly leaves, so I can sort of see where it comes from. And you've got emerald rubies, emerald 4 rubies, and it's called that because the base of the stems are ruby red and it has emerald green leaves, of course. And then you've got shining tot, alluding to the size of the plant quite likely. Now, I have to say.
Yeah. Let's call this out.
Yeah.
This to me,
it loses all the point of being a
What's the
hosta.
point? I know.
Yeah. I mean, it's great to give diversity to a group if people want to collect them just because they collect a group.
Yeah.
But these little tiny hostas, as sort of dinky as they are, I really can't see terribly much point to them. They're too small to make impressive pot plants. And they disappear in the garden.
I would say this one, which is, what's that one?
That's Chartreuse Wiggles.
Chartreuse Wiggles. If you had a large sort of shallow pan full of these.
Could work.
Because of the colour and the form. So this one, okay, we're accepting you.
Yes,
Chartreuse
yeah,
Wiggles.
but I'm not sure about shining tot or in fact emerald for rubies either.
It just kind of looks like a seedling that's...
Well, it looks like what the common name for the hostas are, which we haven't mentioned, which is plantain lily.
Oh.
And it looks like the weed plantain.
There you go.
Yeah, so sorry, but yes, the small ones, yes, the collectors, I know they'll go mad about it, and we'll probably get some hate mail from people who like miniature hostas. But I think a group of plants that does big, but a group of plants that does big so well, why would you want to go down to tinies, I have to say.
Well, that's our segue to big.
Well, not quite, because we've still got one small that we actually actually think is quite good.
Okay, now we're both going to have to lift this.
Yeah, all right, let's... Oh
my goodness me.
Now look at that. Now that I can live with.
Me too.
And this is blue mouse ears. Great name for it, I have to say, because it has that look about it. And as a decent sized colony, it actually is making quite a nice plant.
And
in a very heavy pot.
Very heavy pot. And it's got a beautiful sort of blue-grey leaf.
Yes, and texturally it's interesting because of the way the leaves sit.
Yeah.
So, but it's not quite as tiny as the first 3 we looked at, so it's a little bigger.
And it's a dense plant. There's lots of leaves.
Yeah, and it's sort of, I don't know, it has interest about it, whereas the others, for me at least, offer me nothing as far as I'm concerned.
Let's the pendulum swing other side.
All right, so here we have a quite nice large leafed one. Which was this one again?
This is massive.
Belstone Line. I'm assuming that's a place.
Yes.
Big leaves, nicely veined.
Yeah.
A very attractive hosta. I could live with this one as a nice pot plant or garden plant. It'll be interesting to see what the flowers look like. But yeah, it's nice. But I still think big is better.
Okay.
And the bigger you go, the better.
However, before we get to even bigger, I just want to say that this kind of looks like a tropical plant. So that's the other thing hostas weirdly can do.
Yes, they're not, of course, tropical plants.
No.
But because their leaves are big and chunky, at least in the big and chunky ones,
Yeah.
they can, in fact, give you an almost sort of sumptuous, over-the-top, tropical-esque look.
Talking of the tropics, though, did we go into hardiness? I don't think we did. So obviously they're from Korea, China, Japan.
Yeah.
I would imagine from areas where it snows and it freezes.
Yeah, they're completely cold hardy as far as I can work out. So you can grow hostas in Norway and all sorts of colder Northern Hemisphere parts. We'd never get cold enough in Australia for them to even think that it would be a problem. We're more likely to get too hot and dry.
So that's the thing. So in the other direction.
Yeah. They don't cope with really dry soil, so they do like to have a modicum of moisture the whole time. And certainly you've got to keep them out of the hot blasting sun. So they do need to have a sheltered spot. A little bit of the morning sun won't do them any harm, but you know, by the time it gets to mid-morning, you certainly don't want your hostas to be out in the sun, because otherwise they will just, well, you'll get big burnt patches in the leaves, which will make you feel guilty for the rest of the season.
I guess, though, we should contextualise that is certainly the case in Australia.
Yeah.
But perhaps in Ireland.
Oh, well, I've seen hostas growing out in full sun in Ireland with ornamental grasses, and they look completely weird because they just didn't seem to work. So yes, in certain climates where you get very low light levels, yes, the more sun the better, one would say. And I've certainly seen some pretty impressive hostas that you couldn't leap over in Irish gardens. So yes, something to be jealous of.
Context is everything.
Yes,
but
of
in
course.
Australia, our sun is a killer. Now, ta-da!
Big Daddy.
And Big Daddy is too big for us to live.
Yeah, so we're not going to. It's in a great big pot. It's got fabulous leaves with that slightly glaucous-y, bluey colour to it. And that, of course, is one of the breeding lines that's really important in hostas, is to get bluer and bluer colours of leaves. So that really sort of intense blue they're looking for. And Big Daddy, of course, was bred for its really large leaves. I mean, they're not full size yet because this is still early in the season. So the leaves will get even bigger with a little bit of time. So that gives you a sense of between large and small.
Madness. All right. So we've covered size. I think we should now go and look at form of leaf.
Yes, what a good idea. So now we're going to talk about the form of the leaves, and there's a huge diversity of leaf forms in Hosta, particularly considering it's a pretty small genus and the variation between the species is not vast. So when you look at this one, Blue Mousie's, you can see it's got a very rounded, smallish leaf, and the whole textural quality of it is quite different to any other Hosta I've ever seen. And so we'll go from this and look at some of the other textural forms. And we've got some lovely wavy edged leafed ones. This is one rather weirdly called Pineapple, and I love that sort of textural quality of the leaves waving backwards and forwards. And it's certainly something that growers have worked towards to get this sort of interesting textural quality. And this one has beautifully ribbed leaves. Now that's something that hostas do with aplomb, but this one's got really, really nice bright green leaves, and they are beautifully heavily indented veined. And this is one called Key West, which I think is rather a splendid straight green version. All right, another attractive feature that some hostas do really well is this sort of bullate look. So that sort of crinkled, almost seersucker look, and this one is particularly good. It's probably his most bullate as I've seen, and this is Deep Blue Sea, and I think that's really quite splendid.
Okay, Stephen, we've done form. Colour.
Colour, yes. And where do we start? Well, I guess let's start with a bright gold one.
So the lighter end of the spectrum.
Yeah, so here we have one from Craig's collection called Kiwi.
What a stunner. Now, when we were over in the garden, you made the point that light foliage is really good in shady woodland garden.
Yeah, it lights up a dark corner. So
can't get lighter than that.
Yes, that's an incredible shade of yellow. If they get any more yellow than that, I'd be surprised. So,
and would this be more light sensitive than the others?
Oh yes, generally speaking, gold foliages are more inclined to burn than green ones are. So yes, I would definitely be very careful where I placed a hosta like this because it would turn brown very quickly.
So this is kiwi.
Kiwi,
all right.
Yes.
Now, okay, so the next colour is going to be lime green.
Yes.
And lime green.
Yes, and I do love some of these colours because they've got a little bit of green in them so they don't look quite as chlorotic, perhaps. And this narrow-leafed one I think is rather handsome, and it's one called Moonlight.
Moonlight, beautiful. So a few degrees lighter, but still would look amazing in a shady
yes,
border.
It definitely would.
Okay.
So I guess we now move on.
Okay, more of a mid-green.
Yes, and here's a big-leafed one that's in a mid-green.
Look at that.
And this is Sum and Substance.
Sum and Substance.
Sum and Substance.
Okay.
And it is a fantastic big mid-green, almost still verging on the slightly yellowy green, but nonetheless a mid-green hosta.
And again, those ribbed leaves and massive and looks tropical.
It does look tropical.
Excellent.
So
on to the next
plant.
shade. And now a darker green.
And it's a nice glossy one as well. This one is one of the Kiwi series called Emerald Isle, and it is a really beautiful, glossy, but really good, rich green.
Yeah, fabulous.
Lovely plant. So I like that one.
Would you say that this as we start to get into these darker shades, then planting them in the garden presents a bit more of a challenge in terms of how they stand out?
Not so much if the leaves have got some size to them, because it's as much about size as it is about colour.
Right.
So as long as the leaves have got a bit of oomph in size, then just the texture of them will show them up in the garden quite well. But
Okay.
yes, you're right, the paler colours will stand out in the shade better. But I do love these sort of rich greens, particularly if they're slightly glossy.
Okay, now let's head on down the spectrum or up it.
Or whichever way you look at these things.
And then I guess what everyone is after in a hosta, blue.
Well, exactly. I mean, those sort of silvery blue foliages make really good telling plants in the garden, or in fact as a tub specimen, of course.
Which we'll get to. So we're on the way to blue, but not
Yep.
quite yet with this one.
Yes, this one is elegans.
Yes.
And it's quite a nice, well, you're checking up on me then, which is quite a nice sort of just bluish green, which is really quite pleasant. And it looks to me like its foliage is going to be a reasonably large one. So should make a
Beautiful.
good garden plant.
And then the bluey of the blues. So what have we
Yes.
got here?
Well, we've got the one we engaged with before, which was blue mouse ears, which
My
is
favourite.
a small leafed one.
Yeah.
I think you're going to leave here with one of those.
I really hope, Craig, well, we're going to get to the division and potting in a minute, but I really hope when he was dividing and potting, he divided that
one. All right, so blue mouse ears.
blue mouse ears.
Then we've got another lovely bluish one here, which is Halcyon, which I think is rather splendid, nicely veined
textured
leaves.
yes.
And then a blue puckered one, which is deep blue sea. So you've got quite different looking hostas, but all in those lovely silvery blue colours.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And now, the elephant in the room.
Variegation is our next little look at.
Okay, Stephen.
Yes.
Variegation. And you made the point earlier on about plant snobs or variegation snobs. And I
Yes.
don't know if you were alluding to me,
I might have been.
but you're right. I don't know. What is it? Why do these just, they look beautiful, attractive?
Yeah, they transcend all of those nasty things that people say about variegated plants. And I don't understand it either. It's a bit like people will plant roses that are really prickly, but they won't plant any other shrub that gets prickles on it, and they don't see the contradiction in that.
Yeah.
So I think it's the same with hostas.
I'm just going to say I am consistently inconsistent.
Yeah, well, that seems
with
like
my
a way to
love
go.
of variegation.
Yeah.
So break it down for us, the types of variegation we're looking at.
All right, well, there's basically two colours.
Mm-hmm.
So in your variegations, you have the golden variegations, and we've got a number of golden ones
hold
here.
this one up,
Yep, there's a nice variegated one there.
which is Beach Boy.
And it certainly looks like it's having a nice time at the beach, and it wouldn't. So you can see it's a lovely gold variegation, and conversely, that's a central variegation. If we find another gold, yes, that one will do, a gold variegation there that is an edge. So that one has an edged variegation instead of having the gold centre. So you can see that it's quite different, and that one's called Pizzazz.
Pizzazz.
Yeah. I actually think Beach Boy's a bit pizzazzier than pizzazz, but anyhow, so you have those, and then you go on to the silver and white variegations, and they follow a similar format where you have those that have an internal variegation, and you can see that that's almost all white in the middle, and that goes under the wonderful name of White Christmas. It's a really pretty, heavily variegated plant.
Yep.
I do have to say with variegations, if I'm going to have a variegate, generally speaking, I'd rather something that was boldly variegated than mildly
not.
variegated,
And
because
if
I
we
think that
cast
works
our
better.
minds back to the garden bed, then obviously this very, very pale leaf is going to really stand out.
Oh
in
yes,
that
yes,
silky
I would have
border.
thought so. And if you can reach down there, there is a silver edged one which I'm quite taken with, and I want to know what that is, because that's one that might go home with me. Look at that. Isn't that a beautiful plant? And it's one I've never come across before. So this is one called Neat Splash Rim, which is
Got a neat
predictable.
splash.
Yes.
Actually, it's not a splash, but anyway.
Yeah, so anyhow, so very, very pretty, and gives you the reverse variegation.
Yeah.
So they're the basic types of variegation. And then I guess the only other thing that comes into play is whether it's a green leaf variegated one, whether it's more a blue leaf variegated one. So, you know, in fact, you can have some that are sort of gold leaf and yet still variegated. So you get different shades of gold. So it is a remarkable array of different forms, and I'm so glad that you quite like the variegated ones, Matthew.
But I must say though, it does look amazing here, and further to our point in the border as well. As you can see, everything is elevated on benches. avoiding all the slugs and snails because none of these leaves have a nibble.
Yes, well,
Not one.
I can't see one around, although if I hunt, I might find one. But
there's one. But
Yeah.
let's not be pedantic.
no, I wouldn't think so. But yes, so as pot plants, they're fantastic because it is a little easier to manage the marauding molluscs.
We'll get to that. But before we get to that, let's go and talk to Craig about division. When do you divide and how?
Yes, good idea.
Let's go and find him. We found Craig.
Yes,
Here I am.
down in his little potting shed.
Yeah.
Now, we were here a few months ago and we actually filmed you dividing hostas, which we'll show everyone in a minute. But I guess from my perspective, the rank amateur, how do you know when a hosta needs to be divided?
If you don't need to divide them, it's probably better not to.
Good.
There you go.
Yeah,
So
but
don't.
Because you get big plants, dividing them knocks them back.
Right.
Yeah, and the bigger the crown, the bigger the plant. Yeah.
Okay.
But if you do want to divide them when they're really pot bound, they don't mind being pot bound.
Okay.
So if you keep them vaguely well fed
Yeah.
and obviously enough water,
Yeah.
then they don't mind being in a pot where their roots have really filled up the
No,
pot.
they don't.
Oh.
Yeah, but not more than vaguely well fed.
Yeah, so you feed them well.
Yes, that's right.
All right. And what time of the year would you divide your hostas if you felt the need?
I like to do them later than what you would imagine.
So they're
When
starting to
the roots
move?
are moving.
Ah,
Definitely when they're moving.
so
Yeah.
late winter into early spring?
So we're talking more spring, because I would have thought autumn.
Early to mid-spring.
Ah.
And the reason I say that is if you do them too early, you cut the roots. And you know what woodland plants are like. The roots don't start moving till quite late.
Yeah.
And they're sitting damaged in a cold potting mix.
Ah.
Whereas if you do them when they're moving, the roots just go straight away.
So even for viewers, say in Britain, with sort of different springs to us, you'd suggest the same
I
thing?
would have thought even more so.
Right.
Yeah, because they have a colder winter.
And
So if
wetter,
you've damaged the roots, you're more likely to get issues if they can't move away straight away. So there you go.
That makes sense. Now, you have so many hostas here, Craig. What is the best way for people to buy them?
They can either come here, which is how they're going to get the biggest range,
Yeah.
or they can go onto my web store.
And given that they're herbaceous perennials and the leaves are quite big, would you suggest buying and shipping when they're dormant?
I ship them any time of the year.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So they go in pots.
They go, well, it depends on the time of year,
Yeah.
and now they go in pots.
Yeah.
But if they were dormant, they'd be bare rooted.
Yep, bare rooted.
Okay.
Yeah.
So any time of the year, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know what? I mean, I could sell them bare rooted now. The only thing that stops me is that people freak out.
Yes, I can imagine they would
Yeah.
when it arrives in full leaf
It
and with
actually
nothing.
wouldn't hurt them as long as they don't dry out.
Yeah.
Ah, fantastic. All right. Well, I think we should step back in time and watch Craig teaching us how to divide a hosta. So what are you doing now?
Making it so that I can see what belongs to what in terms of the divisions.
Ah, right.
Yes, if you try and split that without getting some of that soil off and
So you're not just
moving the
gonna-
roots,
Chop it with the spade.
She'll chop through the divisions,
Yeah.
through the crowns.
So once you've taken all the soil off, does it sort of become obvious where you could split it?
Yeah.
You don't really have to think about it.
I can see already. You just need to find those.
Right. Yeah. All right. So that is one new plant.
Many.
do you break down to single crown or do you?
I do.
Yes, yeah, get as many as possible.
Depends on the hosta too, because you know some of them you can give multiple crowns and it doesn't hurt your supply.
How old would that mother plant be? How long does it take to get to that state where you can divide it multiply?
10 years. Depends on the hosta.
Mm.
Yes.
Patriot's a bit slow. Some of them are slower. And you know I mean that comes down to the cost too, where people sort of argue about the price you're charging for them without knowing how long it's taken to get to that point.
So Craig, looking at that to me, oh, I guess so. This is the growing crown
That's
here.
right. Yeah.
So that, yeah, it seems quite close to the bone.
It is close to the bone, but it will grow without a doubt.
Right.
As
Okay.
long as you have roots attached to that.
Yeah.
Then you're away.
Yeah.
Okay. And there are quite clearly roots
Yeah.
attached to that
It can
crown.
be a lot less than that too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And what size pot would you pot those up into? Yeah, so if you were growing them on to sell in the nursery as a well-grown, yeah, so a 14 centimetre pot. Yeah.
Now, if you come to Gentiana, sort of now in spring, this is what those divided hostas are going to look like in the first year after division. There we have a beauty with a fabulous flower spike.
Yeah, exactly. So what more could you want?
This one is called Gold Tiara.
Yes,
There we
lovely little variegate.
And I guess you can see, to Craig's point, quite easy to ship that because it's not a massive pot.
No, you just wrap it in a piece of corrugated
Swaddling
cardboard.
and lay it in a
yeah,
manger.
and off they can go to almost anywhere except for the quarantine states, unfortunately.
Now then, Stephen Ryan.
Now, we've both been released in amongst these hostas, and I think it's time for us to actually select one or two that we might want for us.
Now, I did like that blue mouse here because I just liked, it looks so dense and fabulous in that large pot. I know obviously that specimen's probably, how old do you think that could be?
It could be 8 or 10 years old.
Oh, goodness.
Oh, you've got plenty of time.
Will we live that long?
Yes, exactly.
And there are, no, that's not it. Oh, yes, it is. Blue mouse ears. Yeah. Look how...
Yes, it's tiny.
We will compare this, and I'll just drop in the footage of its big daddy. Goodness me, how long am I going to have to wait? Anyway, I am not leaving without that. What do you want?
All right, I found what I want.
Yes.
I'm going to take a plant of kiwi because I was so taken by how gold that was in the big stock pot. I can see that in my garden.
Goodness.
So I am going to take that one home because I didn't think Craig had any plants.
I didn't, but now I want one.
All right, well, there is another one.
Oh, there's only two.
There's only two left, so we've got the last two of kiwi.
So don't try and come to Gentiana and buy kiwi. I'm sorry.
Yes, and I got the big one.
Now, was there anything else on your shopping list?
All right, well, the only other one I really wanted, well, I liked that one called Deep Blue Sea, the sort of puckered one, and I found a little plant of that. It looks nice and healthy. It'll be fine. It's bigger than your blue mousey is. Not that it matters.
Size doesn't matter. This is always going to be small.
Mine are going to go home and live in pots, at least for now.
Ah, well, so are mine. We should just go and look at Craig's large potted specimens and wrap up with Hosta pot culture.
Yes, good.
So we both confessed we're going to grow these in pots, Stephen. Now, it so happens Craig's got an amazing array in pots. So what are some of the things you should bear in mind if you're growing hostas in pots?
All right, well, they do need to be appropriately watered and basically grossly fed, so they'll take...
Grossly fed?
Yeah, that's right, exactly. They need to be obese if they're going to do their job well. So, you know, the gutsier they are, the better. And then you need to select, interestingly, the pot shape and size needs to marry with the plant that you're putting it in one way or another. And it's really interesting because Craig has got this very tall metal container here.
Yeah.
And yet the hosta that he's used in the top is comparatively low and spreading.
One of those smaller ones, and yet proportionally looks fantastic.
It does. It looks really good like that. And of course, he's got them all in their original plastic pots, just placed in place. So that means that you can take them out if you need to preen them, clean them, do whatever you need to. You can take them out for the winter and put something else back in their place to give you some interest during the winter months. Of course, they're all sitting against in what the southern hemisphere would be a southerly wall. So they're getting plenty of light, but they're not getting the direct sunlight on them. And they're rudely healthy. They're doing exceedingly well.
They are very, very beautiful. So I guess the thing to remember with all woodlands, which actually Jane Tonkin mentioned in our video with her, is that you have to feed.
Yes, they're greedy things and they like plenty of feed when they're in a pot.
Yeah.
And as I said, you just got to find the right colour, the right shape and the right form to go with any given pot that you're going to grow them in. And because these ones are being grown in plastic pots inside the ornamental pot, you've got far more leeway with how you deal with them.
Yeah. And Craig's point earlier too was that they can thrive being quite pot bound.
Yeah, so this plant could come back, it'd be left as it is, fed again in the late winter, and be brought back into place for next year where it will be just a little fuller and thicker.
There you go. Hostas in pots look fantastic.
They are, and that's where mine will live because I can also keep them up off the ground so that I don't have so much issue with slugs and snails.
Yes.
Because they are an issue in my garden. I've got lots of stone walls which make great places for slugs and snails to hide.
Ah, true that.
Yeah, so there you go.
Stephen Ryan, hostas.
Yes, well, they are one of those very popular groups of garden plants. So we needed to engage with them at some stage and we couldn't have come anywhere better.
I really enjoyed it. I really love the fact that they do so well in pots because, you know, I am in between gigs, as they say, and I'm growing a lot of things in pots. So that makes me very happy. But the variety, the shades, the form.
Yep.
I think the only things that I'm not inspired by are the really small ones.
Yeah, look, I have to say the same myself. Although, if you had them in a shallow dish on the outdoor table, perhaps you might.
You need a lot of plants.
Yeah, you'd make a nice drift of it, but it's probably one of the few ways you could use one of those little tiny wee ones.
Yes. Now, if you want to know more about hostas, Craig has shared his book called The Hostapedia. It's not his book, but he owns the book.
Yeah.
So The Hostapedia by Mark R. Zillis. So if you were really into hostas, you might want to try and find this. And there's a great image on the cover of the purpley flowers, which are most commonly found on hostas.
It's a great way to spend your children's inheritance, buying yourself some good monographs on hostas.
Yes, yes. Well, many, many thanks to Craig and the team here at Gentiana for letting us wander around.
Yes, and I would recommend at any time this spring or summer a visit up to Gentiana Nursery, if for nothing else to have a look at the hostas, but Craig has a whole range of other fantastic plants as well.
He does. Now, Gentiana does have an e-com site, and it's probably best to buy hostas when they're dormant, so generally in autumn.
That's not going to stop me buying some today.
No, nor me. And just a word for our international viewers, unfortunately, Australian growers can't ship internationally, and Craig can't ship to the quarantine states in Australia, but anywhere else, he can.
Yeah, so there you go. So hostas, hostas, hostas.
Hostas galore.
Yeah. And we will be doing other things in Craig's fabulous nursery as well.
Yes. Now, if you have a question for Steve and Ryan, put it in the comments below, and we will try and answer it on a Monday.
Yes, so remember to give me context by telling me where you are, of course. And until this time next week, I guess, we'll see you all again.
Look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.
Bye.